Welcome back to The Breakaway. Today we'll be hosting a candid interview with my friend Michael about what it's like to take a break from the sports you love. Join me as we have an open and honest conversation approaching this topic from both a physical and mental perspective. So I've got my friend Michael here with me today, so thank you, Michael, for joining us. I know it's a difficult thing for people who are really into sports and athletics, cycling in this case, to take a break from the sport, whether it be forced or whether you planned for it. It can be very, not only just physically difficult because you have to start back from where you were before, but also extremely mentally difficult. Like how many of us have pressed through injuries and silenced that voice in our head because we just didn't want to slow down and stop. But I think it's important for us to talk about these things and to just get it out there that like it happens and it's gonna be okay if you take a prolonged break. And so that's why I've got you here, and it just means a lot to for me to have you here. So I'd really just like to start with pre-injury. What was your cycling history?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, and it's great to see you. So I've been cycling for about 3 years now. I started early on in 2020. Um, I was living in Singapore at the time, and a few of my friends were pretty into it. They were recreational cyclists, but they had lived in the UK and in Australia. One happened to have an extra bike, and asked if I'd want to join along. So at first, I worked on basically increasing my distances. I would ride for 15, 20 miles. This was all also to not wearing any of the cyclist gear, not wearing bibs, jerseys, anything like that, because I told myself that I'd never wear that. But within the span of a month, I sort of caught the bug for it and started going out on longer rides. I had growing up, my father was huge into cycling. He still is. He did it sort of after his running career had ended from injury. But it's now been a way that I can, bond with friends, get great exercise, and then also incorporate my enjoyment of travel. In Singapore, when we were during COVID and we were locked down, and you couldn't really leave the island, there was plenty of time to explore different parts of the city through cycling, plenty of time to do loops around the island as well too. So that's sort of how my love for it started.
I think we all think to ourselves, "There's no way I'll dress like that and wear those
Yeah.
clothes until we do our first ride, until we do our
Yeah.
first ride on a
And then
on a bike with those seats."
it turns into after a ride, you're happy to sit down and have a coffee in your lycra or walk around the house, anything like that. It's like walking around in a bib is totally common for me now.
Right, right, exactly. And so then, could you just describe your injury for me?
Yeah. So running had for a longer part or a longer period of time been part of my training regimen, and I um, I found out in about May of last year. I started train. I was planning to do the New York City Marathon last fall, and so I was increasing my mileage a lot earlier in the year to prepare for training, and just because. Uh, oftentimes the weekend is whether I decide I want to do, running or cycling, and I generally alternate it. But that particular week, I had been ramping up my mileage. It was about a couple of weeks of 30 to 40 miles, and I felt a pretty sharp pain in my hip. So at that point, it wasn't major, or it didn't feel like a major injury, but um, through taking some time off, doing some strength training work, it still came back and still was an issue. So I got an X-ray, I got an MRI, and it turns out that I had a torn labrum, which is a pretty common injury for runners, and that was as a result of a femoral impingement. So my femur was pushing to the shape of my femur pushed into my hip um, and caused the tear there. So it was really as a result of the impact.
Around that same time, were you having those thoughts in your head, like, should I be taking a break right now? Do I need to stop? Am I going to be forced to stop?
Yeah, it was a little bit. Um, I spoke with my doctor and luckily spoke with a friend's brother who had had a similar injury. And I was in a little bit of a scenario where, for sure, if I kept training that much, I would just make the injury a lot worse. A lot of people do continue to run and be totally normal with a torn labrum. I think there's probably, from what I've read, a large portion of the population that probably has a torn labrum and doesn't even know. But for my scenario, what sort of I planned out at that time, or after a couple weeks of thought, was I will reduce the amount of I'll take a full month off. I'll reduce the amount of time or the amount of volume that I run per week. I'll do strength training. Obviously, that meant more time too for cycling throughout last year, which was nice. And have surgery later on in the year because it's not going to be an issue, or it's not going to be an issue that goes away on its own. And I'll sacrifice some time, in the short term to be able to hopefully have a longer and healthier trajectory over the longer term.
You mentioned that there's probably a lot of people out there who've got an injury. You specifically referenced the torn labrum, but there are a lot of people out there who have injuries, and it's like the old WebMD scenario where you can you can Google yourself into a hole really quick into thinking you've got something way worse than you really have, or that like you can on the same token you can look up so much research into believing that there's absolutely nothing wrong at all. And I think you took a really important step there and like actually went to a medical professional to see, is there actually something wrong here and should I adjust accordingly?
Yeah, I won't lie. I definitely did do some Googling, but I kept it to, medical studies with executive summaries that I could be able to read, but then also consulting with my doctor as well too, because um, I wouldn't want to take an alternate route that could put me in a worse situation. So.
Absolutely. I think that's a super important takeaway. So, and that's just segues nicely into, will you describe what the actual surgery was?
Yeah. So it was an arthroscopic surgery in my left hip, and they basically went in there, sewed up my labrum. So I think there's about 3 or 4 stitches in it, and then the major part too was, and the more time-intensive part of the surgery, which all in was about 4 hours, was shaving down my femur. So I think I was always born with a left femur that I guess was larger than the right femur, and so it didn't fit perfectly into the hip socket. Um, I was not a big runner at all earlier in my life, and so it probably just didn't come about. But they shaved down my femur so that it's a nice, perfect fit into the hip socket. Did the labrum repair, and I think fractured some of the cartilage around there to help blood flow and healing. Some of the cartilage had been damaged because of running and regular wear and tear. But overall, this is the first time I'd ever had surgery in my life. I'd never been under general anesthesia as well too before. But overall, it was like a show up at 8 a.m. in the morning type thing, and then back home and by early afternoon.
Getting a serious surgery like that, especially something that where you have to go under general anesthesia, that makes a lot of people nervous. It would make me nervous. So looking back on it now, do you think you were more nervous about the surgery or about the fact that you were going to have to stop training and could no longer enjoy the activities such as running and cycling, for at least for the foreseeable future?
I would say more so the latter. Particularly the time of year was at the end of the summer and leading up to it. As I made the decision to have the surgery in about June, and I had planned it for as far ahead in November. Um, but it was a constant mental struggle to, um, make sure I wasn't like, I'm going to have this surgery in November. I need to run as much as possible before I can't run anymore. or do something dumb or cause any other injuries. So I think coming to terms with that was the tougher part for me, mentally, as opposed to having the surgery. It was, yeah, it was definitely a weird feeling the day of and going under anesthesia. But I think that was more so the challenge that I had leading up to the surgery date. I mean, I had a number of fantastic rides and runs too throughout the summer and into the fall. So obviously, still grateful that I was able to do that. It would have been a much more difficult scenario if, at that point in May of last year when I had found out if I had to expedite the surgery and do it immediately there, the summer and the fall would have been a lot different.
What was your pre-surgery fitness and your FTP or functional threshold power for people who don't understand the term? What was your pre-surgery fitness and your FTP?
It was like 265 on the last time that I measured it. So I did a lot of work on cycling, particularly as my interest in cycling developed more. It became less about just pure volume and and elevation gain and tracking those statistics. But once I bought a um, an indoor trainer in late 2021 when I moved back to the Boston area, where cycling outside 3 or 4 months out of the year is not really doable. I did, with the help of a training program, a lot more focus on um, doing the types of rides that would help improve that FTP and help improve, my thresholds there. So that was a fun process to go through that.
Yeah, yeah, that type of training is a lot of fun. It's nice to just have that dedication and focus, like working towards a very specific goal. Helps you stay motivated for sure. And then at the time of this recording, it's 2 months after your surgery. Will you just tell us how long were you off the bike? And going off of the previous question, what's your fitness and FTP now?
Yeah, so I was off the bike basically for those the last entire 8 weeks, give or take. Um, I I was on crutches for 8 weeks, and I had a brace that I had to wear all the time too. Uh, but I would put my leg into it's called a CPM machine, a continuous passive motion machine, where you just basically sit there and it moves your hip back and forth to improve flexion and range of motion. I A few times when I was at physical therapy would get onto a stationary bike and do basically zero resistance, but pedaling to help get that motion back better. But it's only been now about a week where um, I've been able to get back on my indoor trainer, actually do an amount of resistance, and start the long process of getting my fitness back. I don't think I could estimate my FTP now, but let's say it's probably somewhere in the mid to high hundreds. My under instruction from my doctor and physical therapist, I'm not supposed to push it. That's definitely hard because I want to. Uh, but yeah, it's the recovery is a long process. It's going to be a process of probably 6 to 9 months with physical therapy and various strength training, and that's separate from just then the cardiovascular process that I have ahead of me of gaining my strength back, because it goes away quite quickly.
Yeah, I appreciate how candid you are about that. That's probably why there aren't more people talking about things like this, or going in to get seen when they've got that nagging feeling that there's something wrong, because they don't want to be set back that far, or to have a 9 month recovery process where even by the end of that they might not be at the same fitness level from where they started. But it's so important, because if you just put something like that off, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And in the long run, we're talking 1, 2, 5, 10 years, you're worse off. You'll be at lower fitness than if you would have just like you did 2 months ago, taking a moment to just put a pause, um, think about the holistic approach. Just put a pause, get the surgery, or take whatever rehabilitation action is needed, and then get back to training once you're healthy again. So, I mean, again, just super thankful for how candid you are on that. It's nice to just have this open conversation.
I was so happy. This was about a week and a half ago, and my physical therapist told me, "Yeah, you're good to get off the crutches, and now you can start riding your indoor bike." Because that was such a relief to get to that first step. So
I'd like to end this interview just talking about your 2023 fitness goals. The new year just begun. What do you hope to accomplish this year?
yeah, it's tough, and I did spend some time thinking about that at the same time as my New Year's resolutions too. And just so much of my life for the past 8 weeks has been consumed by um, the rehabilitation after the surgery. I'd like Last year I rode 6,000 miles. I'd like to, if possible, get maybe 5,000. I want to, try and be realistic about the amount that I can do. But I also want to, make sure that it's another successful year in cycling. As far as my FTP, I'd like to get back to 70, 75% maybe of what I was at pre-surgery. The better that I can do against that goal, the happier I'll be for sure. But particularly running as well too. I'd like to be able to get back to being able to run 3, 4, maybe even 5 times a week. Not having any pain. Um, I'm I'd love to be able to do the marathon in the fall this year. I don't know if that's going to necessarily be in the cards, so that's going to have to be a decision that I make later on down the year. But yeah, overall, as far as fitness, and I play golf as well too, and golf should be totally fine. I haven't missed out on any training for golf, despite being sidelined for the past 8 weeks. But yeah, I think overall I'll just be super grateful to be able to be back outdoors, doing the physical activity that I love to do, because it was a tough 8 weeks. I have it in the rearview mirror at this point, but looking forward to what I can do this year.
Yeah, I like those. They're very like specific and measurable goals, and you've got such a awesome perspective about it all. So I will certainly be cheering for you. I'm sure the rest of us will be cheering for you. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today and just being so open and honest about what it's like, both physically and more importantly, mentally, to take a break from doing the physical activity that you love. So thank you so much.
Of course, my pleasure.
If you enjoyed this interview, click subscribe down below because we'll be following along with Michael periodically throughout the year to see how his 2023 goals are coming along. And as always, thanks for watching. If you've got any questions for myself or Michael, leave them in the comments down below and we'll get back to you.